A king just sold his daughter to an old man in front of thousands. One drunken sentence, one public promise, and a 14-year-old girl's life ended before it even began. What happened next was documented, legal, and so disturbing that history tried to erase it. This is that story. You're 14 years old, positioned in a chamber crowded with countless observers. The man meant to shield you, your father, the mightiest sovereign on the planet, has just surrendered your body with a solitary, intoxicated statement. Initially, comprehension escapes you. You merely sense the atmosphere solidify. The musicians cease their performance. The nobles cease breathing. Even the flames appear to waver in shock. Across the feast hall, the elderly commander who demanded you, a man surpassing your grandfather in years, displays a smile. He comprehends that your father cannot decline. Not here. Not before the entire realm. Your hands start trembling. Your mother shields her face. Every woman present recognizes precisely what has just transpired. Your existence no longer belongs to you, and your father, the sovereign of sovereigns, avoids your gaze. He looks beyond you toward his standing, toward his vanity, toward the image of a divine emperor he cannot permit to fracture. When he articulates, he employs merely one word: approved. The attendees applaud. The commander bows. You remain there suppressing a cry that none will ever perceive, because within this fortress, a daughter's anguish matters less than a monarch's pride. And this silent instant of public treachery is where her narrative truly perishes. Her identity was Amestris, and what befell her represents one of the most troubling illustrations of how absolute authority annihilates even those it claims to cherish. If concealed terrors of history captivate you, subscribe to my channel. Press the like button, and when you encounter the moment that disturbs you most, inform me of your location. Let us commence. Now, permit me to demonstrate how a single choice made at an intoxicated gathering became the origin of 14 years of mental torment. Remain with me because her account worsens. You must first comprehend the realm into which she was born. A realm where one man's utterance could rearrange the destiny of millions. Xerxes was not simply a monarch. He was the monarch of monarchs, governing an empire so expansive it extended from Libya to the Indus Valley, from Thrace to Ethiopia. Nearly 50 million souls existed under his command. And according to Herodotus, who conversed with Persians who served in Xerxes' own court, his statement was not counsel, it constituted decree. A breath from his mouth could rescue a nation or eliminate one. But the genuine peril was not beyond the fortress barriers. It resided within because the Persian court was not a residence. It was a stronghold of quietness, a sealed domain protected by eunuchs who owed everything to the sovereign. No gossip escaped, no disagreement survived, and everyone inside grasped one frightening reality. The nearer you positioned yourself to absolute authority, the simpler it became to be destroyed by it. Inside the fortress, even the monarch's own lineage existed under regulations so inflexible they controlled everything. Where they traveled, whom they could address, even the precise moments they were permitted to consume food. Privacy was non-existent, independence was non-existent, and for the women of the royal household, particularly the sovereign's daughters, their existences were simultaneously elevated and terrifying. They were revered in ritual, concealed in actuality. Treasures of the realm with even less liberty than its servants. Royal daughters were not celebrated in engravings. Most were not even identified in official documentation. They existed as political currency, negotiation instruments, alliance mechanisms, offerings adorned in precious stones. And if you believe that sounds grim, the segment that follows is far more severe. What occurred to Amestris was not merely tragic. It was something even her own people whispered about in terror. Because in a court where the sovereign's desire was absolute, a single error did not destroy him. It destroyed someone else, and for Amestris, that error was about to be committed publicly, irreversibly, and before thousands. Amestris belonged to this domain, but unlike numerous royal daughters, she occupied an unusual position. She shared her identity with Xerxes' principal wife, Amestris the elder, known in surviving texts for her fierce and occasionally ruthless personality. The younger Amestris, however, was born to one of the monarch's secondary concubines, a woman of Bactrian ancestry. Even in a court where beauty was cultivated like craftsmanship, her appearance was noted as extraordinary. She matured in the women's chambers of the fortress, the harem, educated by eunuchs and elder concubines. She acquired the abilities expected of a princess: dance, music, poetry, embroidery, and sources hint at something uncommon. Xerxes maintained her close even as other daughters were dispatched to distant provinces in strategic marriages. A father's affection in the Persian court may sound like protection, but here it would prove to be the beginning of her destruction, because everything transformed during a single gathering in 479 BC. And according to Greek and Persian accounts, though the particulars vary, the essence of the narrative remains horrifyingly consistent. Herodotus preserves the most complete version, supposedly based on testimonies from Persian courtiers, who later fled to Greece. In this telling, Xerxes had been consuming alcohol for days, surrounded by flatterers feeding his sense of divinity and authority. In a moment of drunken arrogance, he positioned himself before thousands of guests and swore an oath by the Persian deities. He would grant any request made to him. This promise was catastrophic, and someone in the chamber knew it. Artabanus, an aging commander once loyal to Xerxes' father, Darius, had lost 3 wives already. Over 60, ambitious and increasingly sidelined, he understood the political value of tying himself to the royal lineage, and he understood something else. Xerxes could not break a public oath, not after the humiliation of his military failures in Greece. To refuse a request now would signal weakness to the entire empire. So Artabanus rose. He bowed and he asked for what no one imagined he would dare request. He asked for the monarch's daughter. He asked for Amestris. A silence fell so thick it seemed to consume the chamber. Guests stared between the commander and the sovereign, fully aware of the audacity of the demand. Royal princesses almost never married ordinary subjects, and when they did, it was to noble young princes, not elderly commanders. Everyone waited for Xerxes to refuse. Everyone expected outrage. Everyone was wrong, because Xerxes had sworn a public oath he could not break. Herodotus describes the monarch turning pale, gripping the arms of his throne, glancing around like a trapped animal. Minutes passed, long, suffocating minutes before he finally forced out a single word. Approved, and with that, Amestris's fate was sealed. According to later fragments, she attempted to plead with her father afterward. She begged him privately to undo the promise, to find a loophole to save her from the life she already feared. But Xerxes, torn between genuine affection and the need to preserve the image of a flawless ruler, chose the image. He rationalized his decision through politics. Artabanus, humiliated publicly, could become a dangerous enemy. Binding him through marriage would stabilize the court. That is what he told himself, repeating the same justification whispered by countless autocrats throughout history. The good of the state outweighs the life of a daughter. 3 months later, the marriage was carried out with all the spectacle expected for a princess of Persia. But those who witnessed it remembered something else entirely. Beneath the silk and jewels worth more than entire cities, Amestris moved like a performer trained to conceal despair. Her beauty made the tragedy sharper, more visible. She walked through the ritual silently, her expression fixed somewhere between duty and dread. Artabanus, meanwhile, radiated triumph. He had secured not only a young and beautiful wife, but a permanent, intimate tie to the Achaemenid bloodline. And, though the ceremony ended, the true consequences of Xerxes' decision were only beginning to unfold, and they were far darker than anyone in that chamber could imagine. The age difference between them was staggering. Amestris was barely 14, while Artabanus was well past 60. Even in a society where marriages between older men and young girls were not unusual, this particular pairing unsettled the fortress. Whispers circulated in corridors and courtyards, murmurs of Xerxes' cruelty in sacrificing his daughter simply to protect his pride. And those whispers would only grow louder as the truth of her marriage began to reveal itself. Because the first months made something painfully clear. Amestris had not entered a marriage, she had entered a sentence. Artabanus, consumed by the desire to control and display his royal bride, kept her in near total isolation. Sources recount how he forbade Amestris from visiting her family chambers or even speaking with her sisters and mother. In Persian culture, where female kinship was a vital source of emotional support and identity, this severing of ties was especially cruel. Amestris was effectively imprisoned in Artabanus' quarters, guarded by servants fiercely loyal to him. She had no freedom of movement, no privacy, and no autonomy of any kind. Fragmented correspondence suggests she tried sending secret messages to her father, begging for intervention. But Xerxes, ashamed of his own decision, yet unable to undo it without admitting weakness, never answered. That silence would haunt her. The most disturbing element of Artabanus' treatment involved his conjugal expectations. Ancient sources, cautious in their language, still make it clear. Despite his advanced age, he subjected Amestris to frequent and forced marital demands. His obsession centered on producing an heir with royal blood, an heir who would secure his position in the imperial hierarchy. Court physicians were summoned. Administrative tablets record payments to fertility specialists, herbs, and concoctions meant to enhance conception. None of this was for Amestris' benefit. She was not regarded as a wife. She was a vessel, a body to be used for political inheritance. 3 years into the marriage, in 476 BC, Amestris finally became pregnant. Artabanus rejoiced, offering grand sacrifices to the Persian gods. For him, the child represented triumph. For Amestris, the pregnancy meant something far darker. She knew that if she delivered the heir he desired, she would be bound to him permanently. Mothers of royal children could not be dismissed, divorced, or released. Her fate would be sealed forever. Servants later described her pregnancy as overshadowed by profound sorrow. She spent hours staring out toward the fortress gardens where she once danced freely, tears sliding down her face in silence. She often refused food, forcing attendants to intervene. The girl who once moved with grace now moved only with dread. In her 9th month, she entered labor, a grueling ordeal that stretched across 2 days. Court midwives documented severe complications. When the child finally arrived, a boy Artabanus immediately named Xerxes, honoring his imperial grandfather. It was clear he was dangerously weak. Palace physicians doubted he would survive, but Artabanus ignored every warning and began planning ceremonies for the infant's presentation. Those ceremonies would never come. 10 days later, the baby died. Official records attributed the death to respiratory failure, but in the shadows of the fortress, darker rumors circulated. Some whispered that Amestris, driven to utter despair, had taken the baby's life herself as the only escape left to her. Others claimed loyal servants, horrified by her suffering, had deliberately neglected the child. No evidence confirms any version. Yet the fact these rumors existed at all reveals how desperate and unbearable her life had become. And the whispers had consequences. The baby's death unleashed something terrible within Artabanus. Convinced that Amestris or her attendants were responsible, he became increasingly abusive and controlling. Servants reported hearing screams from behind closed doors. They saw Amestris with bruises on her arms and face. On one recorded occasion, Artabanus beat her so severely she remained bedridden for weeks. When her body healed, something inside her did not. Witnesses described a profound psychological collapse. The young woman who once pleaded, resisted, searched for small acts of freedom, now moved through life like a shadow. She ate only when forced. She rarely spoke. She spent hours unmoving, staring at nothing, her spirit hollowed out. Xerxes was eventually informed of her condition. Only then did he seem to recognize the magnitude of what he had done to his daughter. Some sources suggest he attempted a discreet intervention, ordering Artabanus to treat Amestris more gently. But on this matter, the monarch's authority meant little. Artabanus, now tied to the royal family through marriage and aware that Xerxes had sacrificed his daughter to preserve his own image, understood the sovereign's weakness. His power within the fortress had grown, and he knew he could act without consequence. Because the monarch who created her suffering was the same monarch who could no longer stop it. Artabanus responded to Xerxes' private warnings with veiled reminders. The sovereign himself had consented to the marriage, and according to Persian custom, the treatment of a wife fell entirely under her husband's authority. To challenge that would be to challenge the very traditions that upheld imperial rule. And Xerxes, caught in a trap of his own making, stepped back. Amestris would remain with Artabanus, and her suffering would continue without interference. But history has a way of turning on the decisions we try hardest to ignore. 14 years after Amestris' marriage, everything changed. Xerxes was assassinated in a fortress coup led by Artabanus and several conspirators. The motivations behind the plot were complex: succession politics, rival factions, long-standing grievances. Yet some accounts claim that Artabanus twisted Amestris' suffering into a justification for murder. He allegedly told his allies that Xerxes had become a weak tyrant, a man so lacking in judgment that he sacrificed his own daughter to maintain his image. It was a breathtaking display of hypocrisy. The very cruelty he inflicted became the excuse he used to kill the man who had allowed it. The coup succeeded for a moment. Artabanus seized control of the fortress and ruled behind the scenes for 7 months. But eventually Xerxes' son Artaxerxes rallied loyal forces, crushed the rebellion, and confronted the commander in the fortress. Artabanus was executed in a violent clash with the royal guard. His reign of influence ended with the same brutality he had inflicted on the young woman he imprisoned. One might imagine that Artabanus' death brought Amestris freedom, perhaps even joy. But the truth was far more tragic. By then, Amestris was 28 years old. Yet witnesses described a woman who seemed decades older. Her hair had streaked with premature gray, her face hollow, her expression vacant. Artaxerxes, her half-brother and now great monarch, tried to restore her place in court. He offered her private chambers, servants, and the autonomy she had been denied. But Amestris rarely stepped outside her rooms. She refused banquets, ceremonies, and festivals. Servants noted she could spend entire days in silence, sometimes weeks, without uttering a word. One day, musicians were sent to lift her spirits. They played a melody she had once danced to on that distant night in 479 BC before everything was taken from her. As soon as she heard it, something inside her snapped. Amestris screamed, a raw and ruptured sound, and shattered their instruments before collapsing into tears. The first she had cried in years. She would not recover. Amestris died at the age of 36. Contemporary sources speak vaguely of prolonged illness, but modern interpretations suggest something far more devastating. Slow self-starvation, a form of suicide that allowed her the only control she had left. Others point to severe depression leading to physical decline. Whatever the medical cause, those who lived alongside her understood the deeper truth. Amestris did not die in 457 BC. She died the night her father said approved. Her body continued for 2 more decades, but her spirit had already been erased. Her story, unsurprisingly, was buried. Achaemenid royal inscriptions never mention her. Xerxes is remembered as the builder of Persepolis, the ruler who challenged Greece, not the man who sacrificed his daughter to preserve his pride. Only in Greek accounts, Herodotus and later chroniclers who gathered Persian oral traditions, do fragments of her tragedy survive. Even there she appears not as a fully realized human being, but as a footnote illustrating the excesses of the Persian court. Yet when we examine the surviving fragments, the administrative tablets, and the faint echoes in ancient texts, we can reconstruct the outline of a life shaped by suffering. Suffering born from a single impulsive decision made by a father drunk on power and surrounded by sycophants. Amestris' story forces us to confront a universal truth. The most devastating acts of violence are not always carried out by enemies or armies, but by those closest to us. Parents, rulers, guardians who wield unchecked authority without conscience. Xerxes did not strike her. He did not imprison her. He did not order her death. But through one careless promise spoken to impress his court, he destroyed her just as surely as any torturer. This is the cruelty of absolute power, violence that leaves no visible wounds, yet breaks a life completely. The tragedy of Amestris is the tragedy of all who live under unrestrained authority, where the will of one individual becomes fate for everyone beneath them. Her story, preserved only in scattered fragments across 2,500 years, reminds us that the greatest horrors often unfold not in war or rebellion, but in the quiet decisions made behind fortress walls. Decisions that powerful men never revisit, but that their children never escape. If this story moved you and you want to explore more documented accounts of the darkest corners of empires and monarchies, consider subscribing and leaving a comment about which civilization or historical figure we should uncover next. If you have reached the end of this account, write Amestris in the comments so we know you walked with us through this entire chilling descent.